Think about the last time you tried to break a deeply ingrained habit. Maybe it was something super common, like eating junk food, skipping the gym, or doom scrolling late at night. What happened when you inevitably slipped up? Did you just shrug it off, or did you spiral and completely abandon your goal? Well, let's dive right into this explainer and completely reframe how we think about addiction and the journey of recovery. For a long time, the clinical conversation around treating addiction has been focused entirely on initial abstinence, like just stopping the behavior. But the modern clinical data, it's telling us that we need a profound shift in focus. Specifically, we need to center our strategy on what is often mapped out in frameworks as sections 10 and 13 of your treatment strategy, the recurrence of use plan. Literally, every single comprehensive treatment plan requires a recurrence of use plan. The foundational mindset here is absolutely crucial. We have to prepare for what happens when, not if, a setback occurs.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to quickly cover the modern face of addiction, the reality of relapse, planning for when, not if, triggers and irrelevant decisions, building the prevention plan, and finally, the journey of continuous care.
Okay, Section 1, the modern face of addiction. Let's kick things off by looking at how the medical community is currently defining the scope of addictive disorders. When you hear the word addiction, what immediately pops into your head? We naturally tend to think of substances, right? Drugs, alcohol, nicotine. But I'm going to ask you to expand that view for a minute. According to recent scientific debates and guidelines like the International Classification of Diseases, our modern understanding of addiction is rapidly evolving to include behaviors that actually have absolutely nothing to do with ingesting a substance. Now, the World Health Organization's ICD-11 approaches this whole behavioral classification very carefully. For a behavior to be officially classified under addictive behaviors, it has to meet 3 highly rigorous scientific criteria. First, clinical relevance, meaning it has to actually cause significant, measurable, functional impairment in your daily life. This isn't just a bad habit you do on weekends. It's something totally disrupting your work, health, or relationships. Second, theoretical embedding. It has to fit established addiction models. For instance, it must fit the idea that our brains become hypersensitive to rewards. And third, empirical evidence. There must be hard data showing it shares the exact same psychological and neurobiological mechanisms as a substance addiction. In applying these strict criteria, the medical community is currently evaluating behaviors like gaming, problematic buying, social media use, and even potentially problematic pornography use. The mechanism of addiction, it turns out, is incredibly adaptable to our modern environment.
Section 2. The reality of relapse. Moving on, we really need to confront some harsh but incredibly important statistics about the recovery process itself. Check this out. The crucial point here is that a staggering 80 to 95% of people treated for things like nicotine, heroin, and alcohol use relapse within just a 1-year period. Let that sink in for a second. 80 to 95%. That means a massive proportion of patients who go through the incredibly difficult process of receiving treatment have at least one lapse within the very first 12 months. And this applies across a huge variety of treatment types, from outpatient counseling to intensive inpatient facilities.
Now, historically, society has viewed this high percentage as a direct treatment failure, or much worse, a moral failing on the part of the individual. But the clinical science tells us that is completely backwards. These numbers actually illustrate that addiction is a chronic condition characterized by alternating periods of abstinence and use. Think about chronic physical illnesses like hypertension or asthma. We don't view an asthma attack as a moral failure, right? We view it as a symptom of a chronic, relapsing disorder. Well, addiction operates the exact same way. Once we accept this biological and behavioral reality, we can fundamentally change how we treat it.
Section 3. Planning for when, not if. Because this condition is chronic, we must shift our entire paradigm to planning for what happens when, not if, a setback occurs.
This brings us to the absolute core of any successful recurrence of use plan, distinguishing between a lapse and a full relapse. Look at the stark contrast here. On the left, a lapse is it's like tripping on a rock on a hiking trail. It is a single episode, a brief, momentary return to the target behavior. It's an expected, almost inevitable part of overcoming the disorder. On the right, a relapse is like falling completely off the trail and into a crater. It's a full return to pre-treatment levels of use, where the individual essentially abandons their recovery goal entirely and loses hope. Recognizing this specific difference is what prevents a minor slip from becoming a total collapse. Your recurrence of use plan is the safety net that catches you when you trip, so you don't fall into the crater. It predetermines exactly what you'll do, who you'll call, and how you'll think about the slip the second a lapse happens.
According to the clinical material on relapse prevention therapy, a lapse shouldn't be viewed as the end of the world. It is simply a fork in the road. Yes, there is the undeniable danger of progressing to a full relapse, but there's also immense opportunity. Take, for instance, someone who has been abstinent from alcohol for 6 months, but during a highly stressful week, they have a single drink. Without a plan, guilt takes over, leading to a binge. But with a recurrence of use plan, they recognize they're at this fork. They stop, call a peer sponsor, and debrief. A lapse allows the individual to understand exactly what went wrong, adapt their coping strategies, and actually reduce their relapse risk for the future by learning directly from that crisis.
Section 4. Triggers and irrelevant decisions. To understand how someone ends up at that critical fork in the road in the first place, we gotta look at the underlying psychology of decision-making.
I absolutely love this concept of seemingly irrelevant decisions, or SIDS. This is another massive pillar of the recurrence of use plan. SIDS are the tiny, almost invisible, mundane choices made early in a chain of events that quietly set the stage for a lapse. Let's look at a concrete example. Say a person knows that drinking during the day is a major trigger for a severe binge. One afternoon, a friend asks to meet up for a quick lunch. The person suggests meeting at a local sports bar instead of a coffee shop, just because they like the food. That is a seemingly irrelevant decision. In the moment, it absolutely doesn't feel like a conscious decision to relapse. It just feels like picking a lunch spot. But it's quietly placing the individual directly into the line of fire. A robust recurrence of use plan is designed to map out and catch these SIDS in real time long before the first drink is ever poured. As you can imagine, with the dominoes falling here, those seemingly irrelevant choices snowball. One SID leads to another until the person is suddenly dropped into a high-risk situation. This is defined as any circumstance where an individual's attempt to refrain from a behavior is directly and immediately threatened. And because of those initial SIDs, it often arises without any obvious loud warning. The core function of a recurrence of use plan is recognizing the first domino falling, rather than waiting until the last one hits.
Section 5. Building the prevention plan. So now that we know the risks and the subtle ways we can wander into danger, let's explore the actual solution, creating that comprehensive recurrence of use plan. Relapse prevention therapy uses these 5 structured steps to help individuals systematically anticipate high-risk situations. Let's break these down really quickly. Step 1 is assessment. This means working with a professional to map out your specific history and identify your unique triggers. Step 2 is insight and awareness raising. This often involves daily self-monitoring, like keeping a journal to spot patterns in your thoughts before a craving even hits. Step 3 is coping skills training, which is literally practicing behavioral responses, like role-playing how to say no at a party so you have muscle memory when you need it. Step 4 focuses on cognitive strategies, managing the mental urges, reframing your internal reactions to a lapse so you don't panic. And finally, Step 5 introduces lifestyle modifications, which integrate broader, positive habits to strengthen your overall baseline capacity to handle stress.
A holistic approach ties all of this together beautifully. By combining broader lifestyle changes like adding daily meditation, prioritizing sleep, or regular exercise, you fundamentally decrease your baseline need to use a substance or behavior as a stress coping mechanism in the first place. But most importantly, and this is what your recurrence of use plan dictates, you prepare to interrupt lapses immediately. If a lapse happens, the strategy kicks in automatically. You renew your commitment, reach out to your support network, and analyze the slip, rather than throwing your hands up in defeat. You catch it right at that fork in the road. Section 6. The journey of continuous care. Finally, we gotta recognize that even the best recurrence of use plan only works if it's supported by a long-term care strategy. Treating addiction isn't some 30-day magic trick. It's an ongoing, living process.
Notice how essential it is to have multiple points of connection here. Because recovery frequently happens outside of a clinical setting, ensuring continuity of care is vital for long-term success. The individual needs to be tethered to clinical support, the community, and their personal commitment. This means care must be consistent over time and constantly adjusted as the client's life inevitably changes. It requires reliable, ongoing contact with counselors and incredibly important linkages to community resources like mutual support groups and peer recovery specialists. A robust plan successfully integrates the clinical safety net with a communal safety net.
I want you to take away this incredibly hopeful fact directly from our sources at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Remission and a fulfilling, self-directed life are entirely achievable.
Even those with the most severe and chronic substance use disorders can regain their health and social function when provided with the right support, the right continuing care, and a realistic, practiced recurrence of use plan.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I leave you with this thought. If a lapse is just a fork in the road, what direction will your recurrence of use plan take you? How can reframing a setback as an opportunity completely change your approach to lifelong recovery? If we stop viewing a lapse as a total failure and start viewing it as a critical data point, a moment to learn, adjust, and strengthen our plan, then recovery isn't just about avoiding a negative outcome. It becomes an active, ongoing process of building a resilient, self-directed life.